So I got this book on my travels on the South Island, a place called Lake Tekapo. Wonderful little bookshop there. Petronella's, I think it's called. And I never heard of this book. I didn't know it existed. I was attracted really by the artwork on the outside. Lovely. Very evocative, very of its time. I mean, this one with a biplane and flying, what are they? Jellyfish? And I looked inside and thought, well, who are they including? And I was amazed. Arthur Conan Doyle, Voltaire, Lovecraft, of course, and Edgar Allan Poe, and H.G. Wells. And H.G. Wells is the first one in the book, called The Star. I hadn't heard of that before. And of course, H.G. Wells, Herbert George Wells, is considered the father of British science fiction. Time Machine, War of the Worlds, and so on. And this is The Star. It's not very long. Probably about 10 pages. Wow. And as I get going, one thing I'm always been interested in, especially with doing this channel, is how do old or older pieces of literature, either ancient or Victorian or whatever, are they relevant today? What themes or what elements are in those books that we could say, yeah, we could study that as really saying this is what it's like today. We could learn things from them. And I approached that with this. Ostensibly, the story is about, and of course we need to put this in the context of the time. It's the late 1900s, early 20th century. Astronomers become aware that Neptune, the planet, becomes erratic. And then there's this like bright light. And it's obvious that something's hit the planet and is forcing it off its, or out of its trajectory around the sun, its orbit. And to cut a long story short, because of Jupiter and the gravity of Jupiter, it's propelled towards Earth. And it comes closer and closer. It doesn't hit, but gets so close that it has an effect on the planet. And whereas we have to consider the fact that some of the elements are slightly dated now, I mean, this thing gets to Earth very quickly. You know, we're not talking months. It's moving along at a crisp rate. But generally, what the author does, Wells, is he really is exploring how would we react? How would people on this planet react knowing that a huge planetary body is going to go close by enough to cause a calamity? But I'll get to that in a moment. A couple of things to talk about, and I'll probably go through these in quick succession. Right at the very beginning, a name is introduced that at the time, if you know the War of the Worlds, you would recognize, and it's Ogilvy. So he's linking another work here with this one. Not sure what came first. Announcements made on the first day of a new year. It doesn't say the year. Neptune, the outermost of all the planets that wheel about the sun, had become very erratic. Ogilvy had already called attention to a suspected retardation in its velocity. So that's the first thing. He's linking a name he's used in another book. He also quite nicely, eloquently talks about the expanse of space as it was then understood in his day. Few people without a training in science can realize the huge isolation of the solar system. The sun, with its specks of planets, its dust of planetoids, and its impalpable comets, swims in a vacant immensity that almost defeats the imagination. And beyond Neptune there is space without warmth, black emptiness for 20 million times a million miles. And that is the smallest estimate of the distance to be traversed before the very nearest of the stars is attained. So he gives this sense of scale, which makes the fact that when Neptune is knocked out of its orbit and it's rearing towards Earth, that speed that it's going at is more remarkable. And then he talks about a planetary collision. One London paper headed the news. Only one. Talking about reactions on Earth now. For the next 3 or 4 pages, he talks about observers. In other words, people on Earth looking up, and what are they doing? And this is what I find amazing. So I'm just going to read little snippets out. The sunset round the globe, thousands of men turned their eyes skyward to see the old familiar stars, just as they had always been. But a great white star came suddenly into the westward sky. Men started, stared, and feared, telling one another of the wars and pestilences that are foreshadowed by these fiery signs in the heavens. Interesting, I think he's almost edging towards an old religiosity there. Sturdy boors, dusky Hottentots, Gold Coast Negroes, this is putting it in his time, Frenchmen, Spaniards, Portuguese, stood in the warmth of the sunrise watching the setting of this strange new star. For it was a world, a sister planet of our Earth, far greater than our Earth indeed, this is Neptune, that had so suddenly flashed into flaming death. Two solid globes had come into one vast mass of incandescence. And then he goes on to talk about reactions. Sailors, habitual watchers of the stars, at sea, heard nothing of its advent, and saw it now rise like a pygmy moon, and climb zenithward, and hang overhead and sink westward with the passing of the night. People began over time to say, "It is brighter today, it is larger, it is nearer." Then make of this what you will. Pretty women, flushed and glittering, heard the news, told jestingly between the dances, and feigned an intelligent interest they did not feel. Lonely tramps murmured those words to comfort themselves, looking skyward. "It has need to be nearer, for the night's as cold as charity. Don't see much warmth from it if it is nearer, all the same." "What is a new star to me?" cried the weeping woman kneeling beside her dead. The schoolboy puzzled it out for himself. "Do we come in the way? I wonder if we will be hit." Lovers looked up and said, "That is our star," they whispered, and felt strangely comforted by the sweet brilliance of its light. The master mathematician looked at it as one might look into the eyes of a brave enemy. He said, "You may kill me, but I can hold you, and all the universe for that matter, in the grip of this little brain. I would not change even now." And then he ends up by saying, "Man has lived in vain," when it becomes obvious that this thing's going to cause some serious damage to the Earth as it passes. The disaster is well done, in fact. He talks about the heat as this flaming now comet passes. It would have been immense, bigger than the Earth. Causes tsunamis, earthquakes, and a terrible loss of life. And there's a lovely little passage here I may use as part of the thumbnail. He said, "The star of the coming doom." It visibly approached. People began to flee. But you must not imagine, because I have spoken of people praying through the night, and people going aboard ships and people fleeing towards mountainous country, that the whole world was already in a terror because of the star. As a matter of fact, use and want still ruled the world. And save for the talk of idle moments and the splendour of the night, 9 human beings out of 10 were still busy at their common occupations. Interesting take, isn't it? When you consider some of the disaster movies or whatever, people are panicking, but not according to H.G. Wells. Common sense was sturdy everywhere, scornful, jesting, a little inclined to persecute the obdurate fearful. Barbarism and savagery, already tired of the novelty, went about their nightly business, and save for a howling dog here and there, the beast world left the star unheeded. And then the star grows in terrible steadfastness, it gets bigger and starts to dominate the sky. And this is what I find amazing. From where Neptune is to reaching the Earth, it only takes 5 days. Okay, we can forgive him, he's writing at a different era. The Earth becomes hot. Upon all the mountains of the Earth the snow and ice began to melt. Rivers flowed thick and turbid. Tides were higher, drowning whole cities. Earthquakes began. Houses and walls crumbled to destruction. The Pacific, the growing tidal wave, poured over island and swept them clear of men. A wall of water 50 feet high upon the long coasts of Asia and swept across the plains of China. The great star was a ball of dull red fire, smoke and ashes. The volcanoes were spouting forth to salute its coming. Great imagery. But then I suppose because he's an Englishman, a wonder happens right at the end, because Europe is pretty much saved. And at last the great star rose, near 10 hours late. The sun rose close upon it, and in the centre of its white heart was a disk of black, because the moon protects the earth. The after effects, because it passes, is really nicely done. The descriptions he gives of dead bodies of men and brutes, water streaming off the land, trees and houses going with it, scooping out titanic gullies along the countryside. There's this immense destruction that has to be dealt with afterwards. And because the Earth has significantly heated up, there's a great migration to the North and South Poles, because they're the only places that people can now survive. But what really I think makes this piece of work is right at the end. It's almost what is the last paragraph. I'm not going to read it all out, but significant portions. So here we go. It starts off, we've focused on Earth, and now the author is taking us to Mars. The Martian astronomers saw from their own standpoint what was occurring. All the familiar continental markings and the masses of the seas remained intact, and indeed the only difference seemed to be a shrinkage of the white discoloration supposed to be frozen water around either pole, which only goes to show how small the vastest of human catastrophes may seem at a distance of a few million miles. Wonderful. I can't stop thinking about it, because what he does, H.G. Wells, is, okay, let's forget the science. A planetary body is knocked out of orbit and it heads towards Earth, so it's very Earth-centric, and then causes immense damage and loss of life, almost to the destruction of the planet. But seen from the vantage points of elsewhere, it's insignificant. It's like ourselves looking down at an anthill and all the ants are scurrying around, but we don't really care and we move on. Very powerful stuff to be reminded. When I was reading this, and that fact that, how do people respond, and some were very indifferent at the time until calamity almost took them over and they had to do something about it. There was a song in the late 1980s by a Scottish group called Damitri, Nothing Ever Happens. There's this wonderful quotation, which I'm now looking for on the lyrics here. Yeah. Telephone exchanges click while there's nobody there. The Martians could land in the car park and no one would care. Closed circuit cameras in department stores shoot the same movie every day. And the stars of these films neither die nor get killed, just survive constant action replay. And nothing ever happens. Nothing happens at all. The needle returns to the start of the song, and we all sing along like before, and we'll all be lonely tonight and lonely tomorrow. The reason I remembered that song is because of the Martians could land in the car park and no one would care. And this is similar. People don't care because they've got lives to lead, and then till literally calamity overtakes them. And then it's suddenly all hands to the pump. Very good. Very thoughtful. So I'm looking forward to reading some others in here. And I must admit, specifically the older authors, I think I'll be looking at Voltaire next. He's got a piece here called Microméga, which I believe is about a 24,000 league tall being from the world of Sirius. You can't be serious. Yeah, please, don't call me Shirley. So yes, wonderful find. Really glad I've got it. And it's just one of those little things. I love short stories. I love little novellas. Mainly because they're very easy and quick to read, but often very, very thoughtful. Probably more thoughtful than most longer pieces, which can build character up over time. But here's an example of that. You don't really need that for an effect. So, H.G. Wells' The Star, contained in this book. Ta-ta for now.